All right, next up we have John Hurd. I'm told this is a man who needs no introduction. Deserves no introduction from John. Mr. John Hurd has served as the Soil Fertility Extension Specialist for Manitoba's Department of Agriculture and previously with Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Extension and Field Crop Research. You don't want me to?
No, we whittled that down.
Okay, perfect. All right, John Hurd.
Thank you very much. I will probably wander a little bit too here. And what I wanted to do, I'm really glad that Don taught the 101 course here. Last week it took 2 days to get through this.
Turn itself off.
I love technology.
Where did it go? You're good. This mic is on anyway, so
okay, good.
Go ahead.
Don and I usually spend 2 days doing this type of course, and he hit all the high points. My role right now is just to show you where we enshrine these guidelines or this research that's been done into provincial guidelines that we try to distribute and hopefully farmers have access to and can use. And so say this in jest, our flagship publications, this is the really Old Testament published. Many of you probably know that the soil test lab that the province ran closed in 1992. And since then, we really haven't been in the game as far as providing recommendations directly to farmers. You don't see our recommendations showing up on soil test reports. If you want a second opinion, you need to go to one of the guides that we basically wrote down what some of those recommendations were in the late 90s. And then we did the same thing somewhat in 2002. And then I had some help, and in 2006, we produced what some refer to as the New Testament, which is really quite old now. And so, really today, I just want to go over what have been, like some of the research that Don showed here. How is it that we move this forward into recommendations or guidelines that hopefully you have access to and will consider using? And how we do that, there's a bunch of grumpy old men that meet once a year on about St. Patrick's Day. Cindy Grant, Dr. Cynthia Grant from Ag Canada up on the hill, used to be kind of a voice of reason, but now we're just largely a bunch of grumpy old men that invite other researchers or other people to bring their research to be vetted amongst a group of, I call ourselves research, extension, and industry scientists and agronomists, and we see what's ready for prime time, what type of research has been done that is scientific and is worthy of taking to the road to farmers. And so that's what we do. And so these are changes. I made it in small print so you couldn't read. I'm just going to go over some of the red things, some of the things today that Don has really set the stage. We operate within the 4R framework, where we're looking at the right rate, source, time, and placement. Most people, like when you look at a soil test, farmers' eyes go right to rate. How much is this going to cost me? And that's where many of our new guidelines are coming in. So we're going to look at the nitrogen rate guidelines for some cereals, corn, and rye. I went in a little more detail. A lot of that good background Don went over in phosphorus. I'm going to show you how that's going to reflect in our new option. And what our story is on biostimulants and biofertilizers and how we should be, farmers should figure out if they're for them. Farmers love surveys, and so I wanted to show you that when you get troubled with telephone surveys, sometimes the information we do get access to and summarize here. I see my red lines have shifted a little bit, but that's my way. So this is the Stratus survey that some of you will get called in February to find out about how your fertilizer practices are and do they fit this 4R scheme. And one of the things that I just want to highlight here is some of the pickle that we're in Traditionally in Manitoba, a third to 50% of the nitrogen does go on in the fall for wheat and canola, predominantly as banded, and a lot of that would be banded ammonia. And we know that just did not happen this year. Mother Nature shut that door. And so we know that farmers are going to have to look at other options. And already, a good number are already involved in some type of mid-row or side-banded options. For those farmers, those plans are not going to change a lot. But for those that are in a normal fall program, I'm sure you've been talking to your agronomists already at your dealership, and you're looking at Plan Bs. And so if you haven't done that, I encourage you to do that, because it isn't that we don't have options. We have more options today than we did, I think, when we gave this talk in 2017 and in Dauphin and 2004, 2005. Last time it was really wet across province. Most farmers, you've been there before. You've handled this through superhuman efforts at our dealerships. They get the fertilizer to you in time, but it's not without planning. So I encourage you to do that. This is the nitrogen. When the phosphorus, oh God, I love this. Anyways, the red line goes right through the numbers, 91, 92%. Your phosphorus program is pretty well set. Most of us are using as close to the 4R as we can at seeding placed phosphorus. Good for the environment, good for making use of phosphorus efficiency. And that's not going to change, but that may, logistically, as farmers, you may still want to have that phosphorus in place, because the seeder doesn't go to the field unless phosphorus is there. Nitrogen, we've got some timing options, not so with phosphorus. Anastasia, I don't know why you pay my salary. They also collect this information. Where do farmers get their fertilizer advice? Well, in Manitoba, 31% get it from their crop consultant. 26% get it from their ag professional at their dealership, maybe their certified crop advisor or other. 30% get it from the fellow that's working at the counter at the dealership or others. 12% get it from the provincial fertilizer recommendations. And so this is, why, we try to update, but we don't force our recommendations to you. And in fact, if we look in more, where does a farmer actually decide on their nitrogen rates in the prairies? And past experience is a really valuable way to make your plan. Glad to see soil testing so prominent. This nutrient balance, I think, for nitrogen, I think that's kind of along what Don was talking about, where people look at how many pounds of N per bushel am I going to need. You move down, the crop consultant is 15%. I'm down here at 2.5%. I'm looking for a new job. Anyways, here is our past recommendations. Don showed these. We had some very good recommendations in the past, and I say they were basically manufactured through brute force, having lots of studies. Don showed, and I'll show a bit of the data. We produced a lot of good information out of a handful of studies recently. In the past, there was quite a bit more done, and they actually produced a yield response according to the available moisture, which is not only environment, but also the soil's ability to supply. And that was okay back when we were growing Katapawa, Nipawa wheat. And then we moved fast forward 10 years ago. We revamped that with some new data, probably with berry wheat. And again, some yields increased. We did produce some of these response curves. As Don mentioned earlier, that's what you need in order to develop some of these economic responses. Why we did this was, does anyone remember when urea was $800 a ton? That was when this happened to urea prices. So in 2007, 2008, not only nitrogen, but phosphorus prices went off scale. And that really prompted people like myself and the American and Ontario people that produce economic response curves said, we need to produce an economic calculator for farmers using nitrogen. You see here, crop prices kind of followed along. It's not that high nitrogen prices made the crop prices higher, but you can see canola prices before that big spike were no more than $6 to $8 a bushel, And since that era, the new era we're in, have tended to be higher and have prompted some fairly high nitrogen rates that we'll look at. We have an Excel calculator that Dr. Regis Karaman has helped us work up. It allows you to put in the fertilizer prices, the crop prices, and it calculates an economically optimum from a response curve what that rate of nitrogen would be. So for 65 bushel yield potential wheat, the blue area is what is the economically optimum. And that's from 25 experiments, which again kind of dwarfs our recent effort. And the recent effort, Don went over this, much fewer sites and unable to develop a response curve like that was applicable across sites and across years. So we can't bring that ultra sophisticated model to you, but we've got a good thumb rule that we will use. And so we've replaced old tables with this. We still put in here, if these are your yield potentials, these may be the useful recommendations based on the soil test. But for the high yield wheat, we're working with that 2 pound of N per bushel value, which tends to be about 30 pounds of nitrogen more than the moist version. First change, same thing with barley. We modified the barley recommendations at that time, and we modified the canola recommendations. And these are very aggressive. And in fact, there's something embedded in this calculator. You may say, that this is a lot of nitrogen to invest in that crop, and there is a risk assessment or calculator with this that allow you to determine. So if you're worried about drought or flooding or trade issues affecting prices and productivity, you can take that risk into account. Corn, Don addressed this, but when we look at grain corn, this is the same survey. There's a lot more options that are used in Manitoba in order to fertilize that crop. And some in the fall, but they're 22% of the farmers do some type of in-crop or after-crop. And it's just that crop facilitates that. So I'm not so worried about fertilizing the corn crop this year. Bigger window and more options. Here's my scatter of yield data. And so we've replaced that with a thumb rule because I can't count on nitrogen coming from organic matter mineralization either. I have a thumb rule that if you have, I blame this on crop husbandry, so if you have bronze level crop husbandry, poor weed control, late cedar, don't have a good corn planter and populations, these were the type of yields we tended to produce, and that's the pound nitrogen that would be required. Where when good crop husbandry is harnessed, we found we moved up quite a bit in yield, and we're able to be, and that efficient crop was more efficient. And these levels, of course, take into account less the soil nitrogen. Now, I'm really keen. Don has a student that's been working with him and Meryl Tenuta. There's a juggernaut of corn research ongoing right now, and there will be updates to this. And fall rye, well, we do have a lot of interest in fall rye, and we had next to no recommendations. And with the higher yield potential, shorter straw, and better lodging tolerance, I think people are willing to invest nitrogen in this crop. There's very limited yield data. The guidelines from the companies are, well, about 20% less N than what's needed for comparable wheat yields. So we've cooked up with a very minimal data set, 3 studies done in Saskatchewan, but some good response curves. This is the average response if this was a hybrid rye to applied nitrogen, and these are the yields. This was open pollinated rye, and basically found that they responded economically to about the same rate of nitrogen. It's just that the yield of the hybrid rye was 20% more. So to use the guideline we're kind of going with, we're saying, well, it's about 1.9 pounds of N per bushel for the open pollinated, the hybrid rye, 1.6 pounds of nitrogen per expected bushel. And so our lines are something like this. And so we hope that the industry finds this useful. The phosphorus rate options, I'm glad Don went through a lot of the background. This, what's been enshrined in the present guide, is what we refer to as a sufficiency approach. The sufficiency approach is dependent on a lot of field studies and helps you to farm close to the line where you get the greatest profit back in that year for phosphorus spent with no consideration of future soil test levels. Farming for the moment. But we know that isn't the way that we're farming in Manitoba, so we felt it's important to provide options. Don and Cindy Grant just did this very large review of collected up all the scientific information in the Great Plains, and they highlighted that, we were seeing phosphorus fertility declining under the sufficiency approach. Don showed some data where yield potential is higher on phosphorus-enriched soils. A reasonable soil test target is this 10 to 20 parts per million Olsen range. That's where about 50% of the time we get a higher yield response to applied N. Some of the Americans, they choose to fertilize up to 25% or to a higher level. We're being a bit more conservative than that, so that's where we placed our target. Through Don and Cindy's work, we found out how much phosphate we need to apply in order to move that soil test up 1 part per million. And if I'm on a neutral pH sand, it doesn't take very much to increase the phosphorus levels. But if I'm on the famous Newdale clay loams or other carbonated clay loams, it could take almost twice as much. It takes twice as much to build, and it also takes a lot slower to drain down. But nevertheless, those are some of the values. And then we use removal values. I think Don showed this. Ultimately, if you followed this approach, we would end up with all our soil test levels being in this, what I would consider a good working range. In the good working range, ultimately, you're just applying what you're removing. You pay as you go. In this range, once you're above that, then you've got the luxury of using starter fertilizer only. That's where you can use your enhanced efficiency phosphorus products. You don't use enhanced efficiency phosphorus products down here because you need brute force. These are the depleted soils that need to be replenished. And, for many farmers, you're probably already working in this range. These are your new fields, your fixer-upper fields. And so you have plans for these fields different than your normal program. This is the mathematics. It's not ours. It's used in Kansas, Ontario, and many other states, where you have, for an example, yield, and if you know what your current soil test level is, and you said, well, the target, I'd like to get up in the middle of that working range, you would set that. Important to know what's the buffering capacity of your soil in general. If you're on the extremes, a sand or a heavy clay, you choose something on either end of that. What's the crop removal? How much is being removed by your crop? How many years? How impatient are you, or how fast you? Okay, and then you just fill out the math, and that tell you, and that's an idea of where it is. And there's great flexibility within this. In years of high phosphorus prices, you don't put this on, but when phosphorus prices are light or crop prices are high, you have the flexibility to do this. And so our proposal is that we have two options for farmers, a short-term sufficiency approach, the one that we have had in the books for years and years, and then a long-term sustainability approach. And I think Don was through this, but we see the short-term approach is still very suitable for farmers for short-term good returns on your phosphorus dollar, but over time it will ratchet your phosphorus soil test levels down into that low category over the long term. It's appropriate for short-term management, rented land, retiring land. If there's poor crop prices or high fertilizer costs, this would be an approach to consider employing. And really, there's no recent research to suggest that this is wrong. This is still the best return on your short-term return on your phosphorus dollar. But the long-term approach is an investment in the long-term productivity of your land. And again, may be very appropriate if you have land rent where you've got a longer-term agreement, then you can invest that. Make sure your landlord knows this, that you're going to farm it like you own it. And provide the optimum or maximum economic returns in a particular year, but in the long term, it should move you up into an area of higher yield potential. It builds low soil test levels, maintains you in the medium zone, and gives you the option at the very high, using starter rates. It can be very economical to farm with less than the removal rates. And part of that is regular soil testing. That's why you don't need to be stuck on these rates. You use your soil testing program to direct when you get up into that good working range. Approach should be flexible and meet the grower's economic situation, goals, land tenure, yield levels, and your time frame. So this is as simple as it's going to look. You say, here's your short-term approach, and these are the general guidelines for those. Some of those are less than removal amounts, so you can see why it would reduce your soil test levels. Long-term sustainability at low soil test levels is the objective here is to move up in 5 years. It's a fairly aggressive approach, but when we're in the mid-range, we're basically farming with removals only. And Don mentioned this calculator. Some farmers find very useful that basically will go through that if a farmer puts in his typical yield, the phosphorus that's being applied, it will, over the balance of a rotation, figure out, am I in a surplus or a deficit? And this is a good self-assessment that is really only applicable for your farm and will indicate, where in that group are you? Are you a builder, depleter, or a maintainer of your fertility levels? Final thing was about the biofertilizers and biostimulants, and there was a session on this yesterday morning, and these definitions were over, but a biofertilizer is a formulated product containing microorganisms that will either enhance the nutrient status or replace nutrients by making them more available. And an example of that may be a jump start or something like that, microbial product. And it's also all the nitrogen rhizobium products. They're all biofertilizers. Plant biostimulant is a substance or microorganism that's aimed to enhance nutritional efficiency, reduce stress, or other traits. And so in the past, some 10 years ago, these products needed to be registered under CFIA, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and there was a lot of small print. There still is a lot of small print on their website, but I've put the requirement used to be there that these products need to be tested and shown to be effective. And I think the feeling was some people felt that is too restrictive, and that's holding products off the market from the Canadian farmer. So let's just strike that off our list of responsibilities. So right now, the CFIA, it still regulates fertilizers and supplements, but only in the regards that they're safe for humans, plants, and the environment, and that they're properly labeled. And there's really no requirement to show what they do or how well or how consistent that they might increase yields. So our suggestion is, I don't know these answers. I don't know if they work. So basically you have to do what we suggested with Jumpstart years ago. You have to test it yourself. Don't count on the federal government to do your thinking for you. Your wish has been granted. Now you can figure this out yourselves. And my job is just to suggest that here are good ways to test it for yourself. So if a product is advertised, and actually this is not my bright idea. There's a group in the United States that they have a lot of these products, and they say, here are some of the standards that they should be meeting. So for products advertised to be more efficient and lower the rate that you need, you actually need to apply it with only 50 to 70% of your normal fertilizer rate, and then see if it matches that. That's the test of effectiveness. But if a product's advertised to enhance yield at the full rate, well, then it's just an add-on. So, and how this would be done is through proper on-farm testing techniques, which is several strips in the field. 4 is recommended, 4 replicates. And And measurements such as yield and quality are important. There's other things, maybe it's affecting pests, etc. You have a lot of coaches right now that can help you with this. The crop commodity associations are well resourced with some very good people, weigh wagons and other things, and they've got a lot of experience in doing good on-farm testing. So be sure to ask for help, and they can do statistical analysis to show if these differences are real or not. So good luck with that. So my summary, we've got nitrogen rates revised to a point for a number of these crops. Oats should be next on our hit list. This is a plea to people in the oat industry. Spend $1 or $2 on some research. You know, you might have noticed we don't make recommendations without research. So if there's we had some very good oat recommendations developed some 15, 20 years ago through Ramona Moore at Ag Canada. But since then, it's like this crop's been locked in time. So if they would do some research and bring it to the table, we would be delighted to consider that to work on some new guidelines. Right now, we've got some very good ones, but they're kind of locked in time. And the phosphorus conversation, as you can tell, it's a bit complicated. You can't tweet out a phosphorus recommendation. It's a conversation you need to have. And biofertilizers and biostimulants, you know, the validity testing is in the hands of growers and their advisors. And I was very happy yesterday, Scott Walker was speaking about this later in the session, and he said that the federal government has seen a big gap or hole, and so they have resurrected some formality, and they are looking to formalize some of this registration process again with biofertilizers and biostimulants. So stay tuned. There may be more coming in there, but right now it's for yourselves to sort out, you and your advisors. So I thank you for your attention today. I look forward to how Anastasia is going to wrap this up. Oh, for more information, if you want to attend one of our soil fertility courses, you need to invest 2 days in Roblin on February 26th and 27th. There's 12 spots left, and it's going to cost you $100 or 10 bushels of canola. And that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you very much, John. And again, on behalf of Manitoba Ag Days, I have a little gift for you before you run away. Thanks a lot, John.
Very much.
One more time for John Hurd.